What happens when a late-night host crosses every line imaginable with one of music's biggest stars? What happens when professional courtesy gets thrown out the window and a simple interview turns into an all-out war? Tonight, we're diving deep into one of the most shocking moments in late-night television history, a confrontation so intense that it ended with security being called and a major celebrity being escorted off set. This isn't just another celebrity feud. This is about respect, boundaries, and what happens when someone in power thinks they can say whatever they want without consequences. Before we get into this explosive story, make sure to hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below telling me what you think went too far. Now, let's get into what really happened that night. The Jimmy Kimmel Live studio was buzzing with its usual pre-show energy. Cameras were being positioned, the audience was filing in, and the production team was running through their final checks. It was supposed to be a routine Tuesday night taping, the kind that happens dozens of times throughout the year. Miley Cyrus was scheduled as the main guest, there to promote her latest album and maybe share some stories about her recent tour. The booking had been in the works for weeks, and everyone expected it to be one of those fun, light-hearted interviews that Kimmel was known for. Miley arrived at the studio around 4 in the afternoon, giving herself plenty of time before the 7:30 taping. She'd been on the show before, and while she wasn't particularly close with Jimmy, their previous interactions had been professional and cordial. She spent time in her dressing room with her team, going over talking points and relaxing before what should have been a straightforward appearance. The trouble started during the pre-interview meeting. This is a standard practice where the host and guest briefly discuss what topics they'll cover during the actual taping. It's meant to ensure everyone is comfortable and that the conversation flows naturally. Miley sat down with Jimmy in his office, expecting to run through the usual questions about her music, her creative process, maybe some light personal stuff that she was comfortable sharing. Instead, Jimmy immediately launched into territory that made Miley uncomfortable. He started asking about her past relationships in a way that felt invasive and unnecessarily personal. When she politely redirected the conversation back to her music, he pushed harder, making comments about her appearance and suggesting that her success was more about controversy than talent. "Look, Miley," Jimmy said, leaning back in his chair, with a smirk that didn't reach his eyes. "People tune in to see the real you, not some sanitized version. They want to hear about the wild stuff, the things that make headlines." Miley felt her jaw tighten, but she kept her voice steady. "I'm here to talk about my music, Jimmy. That's what we agreed on when I booked this appearance. Come on," he pressed. "You can't tell me you don't miss the attention from your more colorful days. The ratings were incredible whenever you did. Something outrageous." The comment hit wrong, and Miley could feel her patience starting to wear thin. She'd worked incredibly hard to evolve as an artist and a person, and the implication that her success was somehow tied to manufactured controversy was both insulting and reductive. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," she said, standing up from her chair. "I'm not here to rehash old tabloid stories. I'm here as a professional musician to discuss my current work." Jimmy's expression shifted, and for a moment, something calculating flickered across his face. "Well, maybe we need to make this more interesting then. You know how television works, Miley. Give the people what they want." The tension in the room was becoming impossible to ignore. Miley's publicist, who had been quietly observing from the corner, stepped forward with a concerned expression. "Perhaps we should take a break and revisit the talking points," she suggested, diplomatically, but Jimmy waved her off dismissively. No, we're fine here. Miley and I are just having an honest conversation about what makes good television." That's when Miley realized this wasn't going to be the professional appearance she'd expected. Jimmy seemed determined to push boundaries that she wasn't comfortable crossing, and his attitude suggested he thought he held all the cards in this situation. I'm not comfortable with this direction, Miley said firmly. If you can't respect the boundaries we discussed, then maybe I should reconsider doing the show. Jimmy's response was telling. Instead of backing down or trying to find a compromise, he doubled down with a comment that would set the tone for everything that followed. Listen, sweetheart, you're not exactly in a position to make demands. You need this show more than this show needs you. The condescending tone and the dismissive way he said, sweetheart, hit Miley like a slap. She'd dealt with this kind of attitude before in the industry. Men who thought they could talk down to her because of her age or her past. But she'd hoped those days were behind her. Excuse me? She said, her voice dropping to a dangerously quiet level. Jimmy seemed to interpret her restraint as weakness rather than the warning it actually was. He leaned forward with that same smirk, clearly enjoying what he perceived as his upper hand in the situation. You heard me. This is my show, my stage, and if you want to sit in that chair tonight, you'll play by my rules. The room went completely silent. Even the production assistants who had been bustling around seemed to sense that something significant was happening. Miley's publicist looked mortified, clearly trying to figure out how to salvage the situation without making things worse. But Miley had reached her limit. She'd spent years learning to stand up for herself, to demand the respect she deserved as both an artist and a human being. She wasn't about to let some late-night host treat her like she was still the young woman who could be bullied into compliance. Your rules, she repeated, her voice gaining strength. Let me tell you something about your rules, Jimmy. Respect isn't negotiable, and neither is basic human decency. Jimmy's smirk faltered slightly, as if he was just beginning to realize that he'd misjudged the situation. But instead of backing down, he made the mistake of pushing even further. Don't lecture me about decency, he shot back. You're the one who built a career on shock value and controversy. Now you want to act like you're above it all? That was the moment everything changed. Miley's eyes flashed with a combination of hurt and anger that had been building throughout the entire conversation. She'd been trying to handle this professionally, to give Jimmy the benefit of the doubt, but his latest comment crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. You know what? She said, her voice steady but filled with unmistakable steel. I think we're done here. She stood up from her chair, her decision made, but Jimmy wasn't ready to let her walk away. The power dynamic he thought he controlled was slipping through his fingers, and that clearly didn't sit well with him. Sit back down, Miley, he said, his voice taking on an edge that hadn't been there before. We're not finished here. Actually, we are, Miley replied, already heading toward the door. I'm not going to sit here and be disrespected by someone who clearly has no interest in conducting a professional interview. Jimmy shot up from his own chair, moving to block her path to the door. The gesture was aggressive enough that Miley's publicist immediately stepped forward, her professional demeanor shifting to protective mode. Jimmy, I think we all need to take a step back, the publicist said carefully. Maybe we can reschedule this for another time when everyone's had a chance to cool down. But Jimmy ignored her completely, his attention laser focused on Miley. You think you can just walk out of here? Do you have any idea how this works? I've been doing this for 20 years, and I don't need some has-been pop star telling me how to run my show. The insult hung in the air like a challenge. Miley felt something shift inside her. A gear clicking into place that she'd learned to access over years of dealing with industry bullies and people who thought they could diminish her with their words. Has been, she repeated, her voice dangerously calm. Is that really the road you want to go down right now? Jimmy's face flushed, and he took a step closer to her. Yeah, it is. When's the last time you had a real hit? When's the last time anyone cared about your music, instead of whatever drama you're manufacturing for attention? The question was designed to hurt, to make her doubt herself and her worth. 5 years ago, it might have worked, but Miley had grown. beyond letting other people's opinions define her value, especially when those opinions came from someone who clearly didn't respect her as an artist or a person. "You know what's funny, Jimmy?" she said, her voice gaining confidence with each word. "You're so threatened by the idea that I might not need you or your show that you're willing to destroy any chance of having a decent interview just to try to put me in what you think is my place." Threatened? Jimmy laughed, but it sounded forced and hollow. "By you? Please. You're here because your publicist begged my producers to book you. Don't confuse charity with necessity." Miley's publicist winced at the comment, clearly mortified by how far south this interaction had gone. She tried once more to intervene. "Look, why don't we all just take 15 minutes, grab some coffee, and start over? I'm sure we can work this out." "There's nothing to work out," Miley said, her eyes never leaving Jimmy's face. "He's made his position perfectly clear. He thinks he can talk to me however he wants, because he believes I'm desperate for his platform." Jimmy crossed his arms, apparently doubling down on his strategy. "Aren't you? Your last album barely cracked the top 20. Your tour numbers are down from your peak. You need exposure, and I'm offering it to you. All you have to do is be honest about who you really are, instead of pretending to be some reformed artist." The comment revealed everything about Jimmy's mindset. He wasn't interested in Miley as she was now. He was interested in exploiting a version of her that no longer existed, a version that he could use to generate controversy and ratings at her expense. "Honest about who I really am," Miley said, her voice rising for the first time. "You want honesty? Here's some honesty for you. You're a small man who gets his kicks from trying to tear down people who've accomplished more than you ever will. You hide behind your desk and your jokes. But when it comes down to it, you're just another bully in a suit." The words hit their target. Jimmy's face went from flushed to pale in the span of a heartbeat, and for a moment he looked genuinely stunned. But instead of backing down or recognizing that he'd pushed too far, he made the mistake that would define the rest of the evening. "You know what?" he said, his voice shaking with anger. "Forget the interview. Forget the whole thing. You want to act like you're too good for this show? Fine. But don't think you can walk out of here and trash me to the press. I have friends in this industry, and I can make sure that your little tantrum tonight follows you everywhere you go." The threat was unmistakable, and it crossed a line that even Miley hadn't expected him to approach. Threatening her career because she wouldn't tolerate his disrespect was exactly the kind of abuse of power that she'd seen destroy other artists. "Are you seriously threatening me right now?" she asked, her voice filled with genuine disbelief. "I'm telling you how the world works," Jimmy replied. "You can play nice, or you can deal with the consequences." That was the moment Miley realized that this wasn't just about a bad interview or a personality clash. This was about someone in a position of power, trying to use that power to coerce her into accepting treatment that no professional should have to tolerate. "The consequences," she repeated. "Let me tell you about consequences, Jimmy. The consequence of treating people like garbage is that eventually people stop accepting it. The consequence of thinking you're untouchable is that you forget other people have voices too." Jimmy seemed to sense that he was losing control of the situation, and his response showed just how far he was willing to go to try to regain it. "Go ahead, make a scene. See how that works out for you. Everyone will just see it as another Miley Cyrus meltdown. Another publicity stunt from someone who can't stay relevant any other way." The comment was calculated to hurt, designed to make her feel like any response she had would be dismissed as manufactured drama. It was a trap that many powerful men in the industry had used before, putting women in impossible positions where standing up for themselves would be framed as emotional instability. But Miley had learned to recognize these tactics, and she wasn't going to fall for them. "You know what the difference is between us, Jimmy," she said, her voice steady and clear. When I make mistakes, I own them and I learn from them. When you make mistakes, you try to destroy anyone who calls you out on them. The conversation had reached a point where there was no going back. Both of them knew that whatever happened next would define not just this moment, but their entire professional relationship going forward. Jimmy's next words proved that he understood the stakes perfectly. Fine. You want to do this the hard way? Let's see how tough you are when the cameras are rolling. The threat was clear. He was planning to ambush her during the actual taping, to use his platform and his home field advantage to try to humiliate her in front of a live audience. It was exactly the kind of calculated cruelty that Miley had hoped she'd left behind in her career. "You think I'm afraid of your cameras?" she asked, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth that didn't reach her eyes. "Jimmy, I've been dealing with cameras since I was a child. If you want to turn this into a public spectacle, I'm more than ready to give the audience a show they'll never forget." The challenge was issued, and both of them knew it. What had started as a pre-interview meeting had become a declaration of war, with the actual taping looming ahead of them like a battlefield. Neither one was willing to abandon. The walk from Jimmy's office to the main stage felt like a march to battle. Miley had 2 hours to prepare herself for what she knew was going to be an ambush, and she used every minute of it. Her publicist was frantically making phone calls, trying to find a way to cancel the appearance without burning bridges. But Miley had made her decision. She wasn't going to run from this fight. When the show began taping, the audience had no idea what they were about to witness. Jimmy delivered his opening monologue with his usual charm and humor, giving no indication of the war that had been declared backstage. But anyone who knew him well might have noticed the extra edge in his smile, the way his jokes seemed to have a little more bite than usual. "Our first guest tonight," Jimmy announced to the audience, "is a singer, actress, and someone who's never been afraid to speak her mind. Please welcome Miley Cyrus." The audience applauded as Miley walked out, and to anyone watching, she looked completely composed. She waved to the crowd, smiled for the cameras, and took her seat across from Jimmy with the poise of someone who'd done this hundreds of times before. But underneath that professional exterior, she was ready for war. "Miley, great to have you back on the show," Jimmy said, his tone deceptively warm and welcoming. "Thanks for having me, Jimmy," she replied, matching his energy perfectly while keeping her guard up. The first few minutes proceeded normally. Jimmy asked about her tour, her new music, the kinds of safe questions that usually filled the beginning of these interviews. But Miley could see it in his eyes, the way he was building up to something. He was like a cat playing with a mouse, and she was waiting for him to show his claws. The shift came about 5 minutes in, right when the audience was settling into the comfortable rhythm of a typical late-night interview. "So Miley," Jimmy said, leaning forward with that familiar smirk, "I have to ask about something that's been on everyone's mind. You've really changed your image over the past few years, haven't you? Gone from wild child to, well, trying to be more mainstream acceptable." The question was loaded, designed to make her sound calculated and fake. Miley recognized the trap immediately, but she also saw the opportunity it presented. "I've grown as a person and as an artist," she said simply. "I think that's what people are supposed to do, isn't it? Evolve." Sure, Jimmy nodded, but his expression suggested he wasn't buying it. "But come on, wasn't the wild stuff more fun? More authentic? I mean, that's when people really paid attention to you." There it was. The same dismissive attitude he'd shown backstage, now being performed for a live audience. Miley felt her jaw tighten, but she kept her voice level. "I think people pay attention to me because of my music, Jimmy. That's what I'm here to talk about." "Right. The music," Jimmy said. And there was something in his tone that made the audience shift uncomfortably. But let's be honest. The music. was never really the main attraction, was it? It was always about the controversy, the shock value. Take that away, and what's left? The question hit the studio like a physical blow. The audience went completely silent, sensing that something was happening that went beyond typical late-night banter. Miley felt every eye in the room on her, waiting to see how she would respond to such a blatant insult. "What's left?" she said slowly, her voice carrying clearly through the suddenly quiet studio. "Is an artist who sold millions of albums, headlined world tours, and earned the respect of her peers. What's left is someone who doesn't need to tear down others to make herself feel important." The response was perfectly delivered, but Jimmy wasn't backing down. If anything, he seemed energized by the confrontation. "Come on, Miley, don't be so sensitive. I'm just asking the questions everyone wants to know. When did you become so serious? So politically correct? It's like you're afraid to be yourself anymore." "Afraid?" Miley repeated, and something in her voice made Jimmy pause. "Jimmy, I'm sitting here on your show, answering your questions honestly. If anyone's afraid, it's you. You're so afraid of having a real conversation that you have to resort to cheap shots and playground insults." The audience was now fully aware that this wasn't a normal interview. Some people were looking around nervously, others were leaning forward with fascination. This was live television drama, unfolding in real time. Jimmy's mask was starting to slip. His practiced charm was giving way to something uglier, more desperate. "I'm not afraid of anything, sweetheart. I'm just trying to get you to drop the act and be real with us." "The act?" Miley stood up from her chair, something that almost never happened during these interviews. "Jimmy, the only person putting on an act here is you. You're pretending to be a friendly host while you're actually just a bully with a microphone." The studio was electric with tension. Jimmy's producers were undoubtedly scrambling in the control room, trying to figure out how to handle a situation that was spiraling completely out of control. "Sit down, Miley," Jimmy said, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. "Let's just finish the interview." "No," she said firmly, remaining standing. "I'm not going to sit here and let you disrespect me for your audience's entertainment. You invited me here as a guest, not as a target for your insecurities." Jimmy's face was flushed with embarrassment and anger. The power dynamic he'd counted on had completely reversed, and he was losing control of his own show in front of hundreds of people. "You know what?" he said, standing up as well. "If you can't handle a simple interview, maybe you should leave." "Maybe. I should," Miley agreed, but she wasn't moving toward the exit. Instead, she turned to address the audience directly. "I came here tonight to talk about my music, my art, and my growth as a person. Instead, I've been subjected to personal attacks and professional disrespect. I want everyone here to know that this isn't how guests should be treated, and it's not how anyone should be treated." The audience was captivated. Some were applauding. Others were just staring in shock. Jimmy looked like he'd been slapped, clearly not expecting Miley to turn the tables so completely. "Security!" he called out, his voice cracking slightly. "I think we need security out here." The word hung in the air like an accusation. Jimmy was calling security on a guest who had done nothing but defend herself against his attacks. It was a display of power that revealed everything about his character. "Security?" Miley laughed, but there was no humor in it. "For what, Jimmy?" "For standing up for myself. For refusing to be your punching bag." But the security guards were already moving, clearly having been instructed to escort Miley off the set. She didn't resist, didn't cause a scene, but she also didn't back down. "This is what happens," she said, speaking to the audience as the guards approached. "When you refuse to let people treat you like garbage, this is what happens when you demand respect in a world that doesn't want to give it to you." As the security guards reached her, Miley looked directly at Jimmy one last time. You know what the sad thing is, Jimmy? You had a chance to have a real conversation with me tonight. You could have learned something about growth, about change, about what it means to evolve as an artist and a person. Instead, you chose to try to tear me down because it was easier than building something meaningful. The guards were gently, but firmly guiding her toward the exit, but Miley's voice carried clearly through the studio. I hope someday you figure out that respect isn't something you can demand. It's something you have to earn. And tonight, you lost any chance of earning mine. The studio fell completely silent as Miley was escorted off the stage. Jimmy stood there, alone under the bright lights, facing an audience that had just witnessed something unprecedented. His show, his stage, his rules, and yet somehow, in that moment, it felt like Miley had won. The cameras kept rolling, capturing every second of Jimmy's humiliation as he tried to regain his composure and salvage what was left of the show. But everyone in that studio knew they'd witnessed something historic, a moment when someone refused to be diminished and paid the price for their dignity. That's the story of how Miley Cyrus got kicked off Jimmy Kimmel's show, not because she was difficult or unprofessional, but because she refused to let a man in power use that power to humiliate her. It's a story about standing up to bullies, about demanding respect, and about the cost of maintaining your dignity in a world that doesn't always want to give it to you. What do you think? Was Miley right to stand her ground, or should she have just played along to avoid the confrontation? Drop your thoughts in the comments below and make sure to subscribe for more stories that reveal what really happens behind the scenes in Hollywood. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.